Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this event. Our numbers are somewhat depleted. What's happened? Has there been an emergency, a crisis in London? Or are there bigger crises in the world? Well, we'll learn more. You will have heard all about the news recently, of course, and what's been happening at London Bridge and elsewhere. Really tragic news. But it just goes to underline what a world of risk we're in, doesn't it? Now, as far as risk, security, cybersecurity, the general world of governance and auditing and assurance, that is, of course, the world we're in. And we have a key role to play in these rather fast evolving fields. What I want to say is a couple of things about the venue first, and then we'll get into the evening's proceedings, as it were. My name is Dalim, and I'm Events Director for ISACA London Chapter, and this is, of course, an ISACA London Chapter event. But there are no fire alarms or other emergency measures scheduled for tonight. If you do hear bells, then we need to leave in an orderly fashion in the usual way. The way we would do that is to head either that direction, where we will see a little running figure on a green background, and follow that leads you out to the emergency exits, or the same, go to the next room and look for an equivalent figure, head out that way. If you have a personal need to leave, to get out, well, just try not to disturb too many people in the row that you're in, of course, but no problem at all. Please be aware that the event is being filmed and that the line of sight is more or less on that gentleman who's just walking out there. The line of sight is more or less here. So we're doing filming today, but the intention is not to film you. So don't worry about that. We will be filming our two speakers and their fine presentations. The things that we've got for you tonight are really rather good, and they're rather different. I'm going to try and find a way of going to the next slide, which is here, hopefully. And this is the event we have for you tonight. We have an event which is going to last till probably between 7:30 and 8. And then we'll stop and go next door where we've got lots of food and drink for you. You've had some already, I hope, because we had some to start with. Then we'll have lots more, including alcohol, at the end of the event. So perhaps that's an incentive to stay, but I'm sure a much bigger incentive is the chance to network with your peers and also with the speakers after the event. The event today has a rather interesting title, Risk Management and GSR. Who's heard of GSR before? Okay, I would guess that you've been to previous events then, because I've invented the term GSR. And I do want it to spread, but I want it to be something that we're all increasingly aware of. Global social responsibility. Gentlemen, your features are going to be on camera if you don't go and sit on the other side of the room, when there's a chance that there might not be. Global social responsibility, well, what does that mean? I've taken it to be awareness of our situation in the world, in our society, and so on. So two aspects of that we're going to look at today. We're very fortunate to have two excellent presenters for those topics. The first is Murray from IBM, and he, as you can see, is the global lead for climate risk, energy transition, and resilience at IBM Global Business Services. Well, he would have to be a global lead for that, wouldn't he? Because otherwise, how can you just manage your own little microclimate and hope that it doesn't affect anyone else? Our second presenter, Neil, is playing an absolutely vital role in terms of bringing together different aspects of something that is unfortunately a big feature of our world today. The easy headline to give you is 39 bodies found in a wagon in Essex. You know what I mean? And that is something that is just the tip of a different iceberg to the climate change iceberg. It's something we must try and stop. And Neil and his colleagues and many, many contacts, including IBM, are working hard to prevent it. So that's an overview of the themes for this evening's talks. As far as other things is concerned, we have a number of things proposed for you, but I have to tell you that after some concerns expressed by the President and Vice President of ISACA London chapter, we've stopped the future events at this venue and we'll be moving elsewhere. Where will we be moving? Not yet established. So we're looking for venues for January through till June. We are fairly confident we'll be able to find them, but I can't therefore give you a venue or a date or of course topics for our events January to June, which is a very unusual situation for us, and we will try and address it. Okay, well, other news and so on you will get at the end of the event, but meanwhile, let me just lead you into tonight's presentation. And Rachel, that's great. And this is, of course, on climate change, climate risk, resilience, and is presented by Dr. Murray Simpson of IBM.
Thanks. And now, because we're an IT company or digital technology, oh, there we go. It's fantastic. It's worked. Rachel is wonderful. You should come and work for IBM, Rachel. So thank you very much, Dalim, for the introduction. And thank you, Neil, for letting me go first, because I'm sorry my throat is particularly bad. So I'm hoping I can last for the half an hour or so that I'm going to be talking. Any questions, then please feel free to ask those at the end. Because I'm going to head off before the networking, if that's okay. Sorry about that. Got a big day tomorrow, a lot of talking to do. So, does anybody know what's happening in Madrid at the moment? Any hands up? Anybody, please? Yeah. 3, 5 people, 6, 7, 10 people. So yeah. Yeah. Sorry, you were going to say?
The UN Climate Conference.
Exactly. Okay. So right now in Madrid, which was supposed to be in Chile, but due to civil unrest in Chile, the event was moved to Madrid, is the UN conference. It's actually called Conference of the Parties, which is the UNFCCC, the United Nations Framework Convention for Climate Change. And the Conference of the Parties is this is the one perhaps before the next most important one since Paris. So Paris, I'm sure many more of you will know, is where the climate goals were established most recently, actually renewing some that were established in Kyoto some 20 years ago or so. The next, sorry, I know I'm not trying to test you here, but the next one, next year, do you know where the next COP is going to be? The next Conference of the Parties? What I would say is the most important since Paris? Glasgow. Yes, Glasgow. Okay, so next year, this time next year, we will have 200 countries represented here in the UK, assuming we're still the UK at that point. And that will be the most important and largest international conference in terms of countries attending ever since Paris. And it'll be particularly important because, of course, here in the UK, we have legislated to hit net zero carbon by 2050. So that is now in law, and we are the only OECD country to have legislated that. There are other countries that have legislated, but not OECD countries. So it's a very important moment, whether you agree with the mechanics and the timing and the science behind achieving that and achieving it by 2050. The point is that it is legislated, and that changes the game. It is a game changer. So this evening I'm just going to really talk more about risk, because that's what I was asked to come here and talk about. But I'll also highlight a few things about the significant shift which has happened in society and around the world over the last few years. And in particular, the significant shift that's happened in business, which is quite seismic, to be honest. So as you can see here, climate transition and sustainability, a matter of economics and survival. And by survival, what I'm talking about is not just survival of the planet and survival of people on the planet, but also survival of business. Because unless businesses wake up, recognize the economic situation and the economics behind the climate challenges, then businesses will not survive. There are three areas of risk. We have physical risk, transition risk, and liability risk. And these areas of risk really summarize the impacts that climate and climate change is having on business and on society. So physical risk, we have two components to that, acute and chronic. So if you think about physical assets, so who here works for a company that owns buildings and so on and so stuff around the world? Okay, a few people. Okay, so all of those buildings are subject to physical risks, and some of them are acute and some of them are chronic. So physical risks, acute and chronic. Chronic being sea level rise, increased temperatures, soil moisture and that sort of thing. Acute, more about flooding, it's about wildfires, it's about sort of severe impacts, extreme variabilities basically. So these are important risks, of course, but then there are also transition risks. By transition risks, here we go, thank you. What do I need to do now? Anything in particular?
Click next.
Okay, great, wonderful. So as you can see here, transition risks are about moving from a high carbon base to a low carbon base. So whether that's on an individual basis or on a societal basis, it's about shifting from high carbon to low carbon. So the financial risks related to transition as opposed to physical are just as great, and that's important because often we think about flood, we think about heat waves and wildfires being the biggest risk, but in fact that transition risk and the exposure of companies and society to transition risks is very important. And the pressures that are coming from transition risks are really twofold. Regulation, so at the moment the Financial Conduct Authority and the PRA, the Prudential Regulation Authority of the Bank of England, are both working very hard to put in place regulation which will force companies to disclose their climate-related financial risk. So by that what I mean is that they will have to report on their exposure to both physical risk and transition risk. That is to say, they will need to know what their financial risk is to the transition from a high carbon base to a low carbon, and also to those physical risks that we've talked about. And now we come to liability risk. Liability risk is really a resulting risk from those two other factors. So I don't know if anybody's heard of the Pacific and General Electric Company, PGE, in California. So in the wildfires a couple of years ago, PGE were basically accused and have now been taken to court by hundreds, thousands of people and large companies, and are being sued for billions because of their lack of ability and lack of capacity and inability to respond to the physical risks of having their cables across through forests, which sparked a lot of those wildfires that happened as a result of the severe drought and moisture of the soils and the drying out of the forests in California. So we could actually say now that that's the first bankruptcy as a result of climate change, and we're talking about billions of dollars. That's PGE. Why are IBM useful or involved in this? Well, the reason is basically because we're talking about trillions of dollars of assets. We're talking about a highly complex situation. And very importantly, we're talking about massive amounts of data, huge amounts of data. Data generated by the climate models themselves, so the ensembles of different models around the world that project and try to forecast what is happening or going to happen as a result of increases in carbon emissions and so on. And also the magnitude of the problem and the uncertainties, the timelines, and the various outcomes that we're looking at. So this is why we've basically said, yes, we can help in this space. It's not something that IBM have been working in before, although we do own the weather company. I don't know if anybody has spent any time in America. Has anyone heard of the weather company before? No. Okay, you have. Yeah, okay. So the weather company in the UK and Europe is very not known at all, really, but in America, the Weather Channel is actually the most watched TV channel in America, even more than Channel Trump, which is hard to believe. But no, it's the most watched channel. Obviously, it's not just forecasting weather. They have documentaries and drama and so on and so forth. But it's a huge company. We purchased it a few years ago, and the weather company generates 25 billion weather forecasts a day. It is the largest and most accurate weather forecasting system outside of a government system that exists in the world. And clearly we're not doing a very good job if most people don't know about it, but there we go. But we have the capacity, we have the knowledge. It's about extending that knowledge and building capacity and finding solutions. Just a quick word on this. There are a few more slides that have got a lot of text on. I'm not going to go into all of them, but I felt it was important to put them up so that you as an organisation have access to the information going forward. So this is an important shift. The Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosure. So the task force was formed out of the G20 by the Financial Stability Board of the G20. And the chairman of the Financial Stability Board happens to be Governor of the Bank of England, Mark Carney. Mark Carney got together with Michael Bloomberg. They decided that one of the key ways to make a shift in society towards finding solutions for climate change and climate risk was to form a task force that would involve the private sector. And this is a fundamentally important moment, really, because it's all very well having non-governmental organisations and governments and activists working towards goals to change the way people behave and change the world and make people aware, and that's laudable and important, and I would never say that it shouldn't be done. But we know just throughout history that if things are going to change on a massive scale, we need to get the markets involved. We need to get money involved, basically. And this is what the task force has done. There are over 800 signatories to the task force, and they support recommendations and guidelines, which you can see online. And the task force is made up of those 800, there are over 400 financial firms, financial services sector, and they represent over $110 trillion in assets. So these people, these organisations, these companies, all companies that you will have heard of, multinational global corporations have signed up to this. Why have they signed up to it? Because they're scared about losing money, basically. They know they need to act. And so that's why it's so important. And just yesterday, Mark Carney was announced to be the next UN climate envoy when he steps down from being governor of the Bank of England. I believe it's going to be at the end of January when he takes up the position of the UN climate envoy. It's a paid position, and he's getting paid $1 to be the climate envoy. So, you know, I think we should take our hat off to Mark Carney. You know, he certainly didn't need to do this, but he has spearheaded a lot of the work that has happened as a result of that task force, and really driven forward, especially here in the UK, what the FCA and the PRA are doing. These are just a few statements. BlackRock, London School of Economics, Bloomberg, HSBC, Vanguard, as you can see, all of them stating this is now a mainstream issue. So where's the pressure coming from? The pressure's coming from, yes, the danger of the physical risk, but it's also coming from shareholders. The shareholders do not want to lose money. They do not want to lose value in their shares, and the companies do not want to lose their shareholders. And if the risks that I've just described to you kick in, or rather as they kick in, because they are already kicking in, then shareholders will start to lose money, the companies will start to reduce in value. And so that is a huge driver. In addition, regulation is on the way, as I said. So you put those two things together and you have, if I pardon the pun, a perfect storm. What are the kind of risks we're talking about? Well, I highlighted them to you: transition, physical, and liability. It's not just about the risks, though. There are also opportunities. So when a company is looking at their exposure and the issues that they have to deal with, they also look at the opportunities. So potential for resource efficiency, potential for new energy sources, potential for new products, new services, new markets, and also increasing their resilience per se, not just to climate exposure, but increasing their resilience. And of course, it all feeds into the financial impacts along the bottom here. I'm not going to go on about our services, but just suffice to say that these four areas are key areas. We're talking about risks, so of course risk management is something that IBM is focused on. We also own the Promontory Financial Group. I don't know if anybody's heard of Promontory. Promontory work with financial services sector on regulation and risk. So risk management is important. Of course, scenario analysis is important as we go forward. What's going to happen when certain climate impacts kick in, when we hit certain emission levels. Disclosure, as I mentioned, when regulation comes, even before that, shareholders are asking now for transparency and disclosure, measurement and reporting of the climate-related financial risk. And of course, innovation. And this is really where IBM play a big role because of the exponential technologies that we need to use to try to find the solutions. So this sort of talks about some of those. I won't spend long on that. But suffice to say, we have, of course, Watson AI that is important in terms of advanced analytics and predicting things as we go forward. The weather company, as I mentioned, Promontory Financial, and a bunch of other pre-existing capabilities that IBM have that they can bring to bear to assist in finding solutions to the challenges that I've outlined. Also Red Hat. I don't know if anybody's heard of Red Hat. Do you know about Red Hat? You know? Yeah. Who owns Red Hat? We own, so IBM own Red Hat. We bought it 3 months ago. Any idea what we bought Red Hat for? A lot, yes, it was a lot. Yeah. It's quite an important company in the world that a lot of people haven't heard of. Of course, it's Linux and OpenShift and so on. And what we have bet the farm on is open source. So obviously, we are completely involved in and behind cybersecurity and proprietary data, but we are against the black box. We do not advocate that approach to IT going forward. It's about open source, OpenShift, and that's why we bought Red Hat, to promote hybrid multi-cloud systems so that we can mesh data from open areas with proprietary data to assist in solutioning for corporations around the world. We bought Red Hat 3 months ago for $38 billion cash. I didn't actually buy that myself, but obviously, but apparently that was the way it went. So, we're in the game in a big way in lots of areas, but this is one of the key areas in terms of data. So these are some of the exponential technologies that are important when we're thinking about climate risk. So I mentioned hybrid multi-cloud, obviously the Internet of Things. This is where we're able to track and see climate risk exposure, vulnerability in real time. Blockchain, it's a way of authenticating and verifying carbon emissions across supply chains once they've been measured, and also getting involved in tracking regulatory requirements and emissions cap and trade schemes, that sort of thing. Geospatial data layering, that's software that we've built through IBM research over the years, part of the weather company. I mentioned AI, of course, discerning patterns and refining climate risk exposure, and advanced analytics, taking the risk analytics to another level. All important stuff to be able to find solutions. So this just reiterates these and gives a few examples. So for Yara, global agricultural company, using geospatial data layering, very important for accessing different crops and information around the world as it's being affected by climate and seasonality. ABB, in terms of leases and so on. Tenant, which is leveraging blockchain for new business models across energy ecosystems. BP, using IBM Red Hat, and so on. So again, I won't go into each slide in detail. This sort of gives a quick overview of Climanomics, which is a platform that we use for our climate risk analytics. We work with an alliance partner on this, and that is based on, you can see here in the top right, the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosure, that risk framework that we talked about before. In addition, PAIRS, which is the geospatial data analytics, using this to monitor and analyze, predict health and hydrocarbon emission monitoring. AI, we talked about there briefly in terms of predicting and using advanced analytics to look at how we can refine climate risk exposure. IoT, so building and asset management, again, of course, very important in terms of how we try to achieve net zero carbon going forward. And at this point, I'd just like to be clear that IBM do not offset any of their emissions. And that is a very important point, because from a scientific standpoint, offsetting is not going to save us, okay? It's not going to help. Planting trees, there's not enough of the planet to plant enough trees to offset the carbon emissions that we're pumping out. So when you hear, and I'm not having a pop at any other companies per se here, but there are plenty of large tech companies out there who say they are carbon neutral. they may be carbon neutral, but they are only carbon neutral because they're paying millions of dollars to offset companies to offset their emissions. They have not actually achieved carbon reduction through energy conservation and energy efficiency. We will not offset carbon. It's not the way forward. It is the very last resort, the very, very last resort, not the first step. And that's a very important factor. So, we work with companies to provide large data centers that are really, really efficient and conserve energy, but we will never go out there and say they are carbon neutral, because they're not. We could go and pay some money to get some people to plant trees, and I won't go on about offsetting too much, but suffice to say, the offset industry, and it is an industry, is beset with problems and very worrying projects that are often take place in developing countries around the world that have detrimental environmental impacts that really are not looked at properly. There are some good companies, but there are many, many out there that are not. So I just wanted to make that point because it's important as far as building and asset management goes. Blockchain I mentioned in terms of the verification, authentication across supply chains, and Red Hat we talked about already. This is some information about the weather company. We talked about that already a bit, but there's some additional information there for you to digest going forward. Energy transition services, so some of the use cases here are based around new business model innovation, quantifying CO2 emissions, and other energy transition services to enable that transition through a safe and secure process that doesn't increase the financial risk of companies. This is the climate service Climanomics platform. It's based on 3 modules. So this is the risk analytics that I was talking about at the beginning. Hazard module, vulnerability module, and a financial module. So this platform actually quantifies the climate risk for assets from the ground up and at portfolio level. So I've just got a case study that we'll get to in a moment, but these are the different criteria that are used in the Climanomics platform, and you can see we look at a whole range of different physical risks, but also transition risks in terms of carbon pricing, litigation, and of course reputational risk, which is very important. So in financial terms, the Climanomics software delivers financial results, point-and-click scenario analysis, and property level to portfolio level insights, as I mentioned before. What we look at is for different clients across real estate, across financial services sector and the industrial sector particularly as well, due diligence, risk management, portfolio management as well. So the short case study I've got here is actually on oil and gas. We looked at oil refineries in the Gulf of Mexico. So if we run the model on oil refineries in the Gulf of Mexico, what we see here is the largest risk at the moment, the highest exposure financially that oil refineries in the Gulf of Mexico have is based on carbon pricing. So at the moment, the price of carbon has gone extremely high. So in fact, this was, we conducted this a few months ago, so it would be even worse now. It would have increased further. If we now look at the same parameters but change the time frame by 20 years, so we go ahead to 2040, what we can see is actually the biggest risk for those oil refineries in the Gulf of Mexico is coastal flooding. So carbon pricing is still up there, but coastal flooding is the biggest risk. So that's the kind of power that the model is able to provide. Of course, more granular detail is useful. Advanced analytics, ground truthing, Earth surface dynamics, all very important to look at. But you can see here quite a stark wake-up call for the massive oil companies that have oil refineries in the Gulf of Mexico. Important for them to know this. So the characteristics, I've pretty much been through them. Last couple of slides now. This is an analysis of physical liability and transition climate risk for financial returns and savings. So very pertinent to everybody here in the room, I think. I hope, anyway. You have some additional knowledge on that now. It affects trading, it affects operations, it affects balance sheets, and it's fundamental. Regulation is round the corner. Shareholders are putting pressure on corporations, and it's an opportunity as well for everybody here and for companies to actually address the issues by looking at new markets, new services, and new products going forward. And that's why you see Shell, BP, other oil majors moving into the energy market now. They're not oil and gas companies anymore, so they say. They are energy companies. And why are they doing that? For this very reason. Just finally, just to show you, I'm sure many of you are aware of the Sustainable Development Goals. A lot of companies now are mapping their activities against the Sustainable Development Goals. And it's useful to be aware of them. It's not just a CSR exercise anymore. This is actually now being used as benchmarks for certain activities. So it's worth being aware of that. Also being aware that there are not just the 17 goals, but 232 indicators. So it's not just an easy, straightforward approach to tracking. You actually have to look very hard at this. And this is where IBM have been working against the Sustainable Development Goals. And this rather messy diagram shows you how we map our activities against those goals. So you can see we're pretty active. We should be doing more in this area, really. The most important thing right now is to look at the risks that I've highlighted to you and the ways we can address those risks going forward. Thank you very much.
So my name is Neil Giles. I work for a little NGO called Stop the Traffic. As the previous speaker mentioned, there's a senior person from IBM that is on our board of trustees, and the platform that is delivering this solution now is built by IBM Data for Good Labs in Dublin, and is a result of 2.5 years of their efforts and probably about $2.5 million of their money. Now that seems like a lot of money to me from a little not-for-profit that survives on way less than that every year. And it probably seems like mere bagatelle to all you wonderful folk in the world of IT, or not. I'm law enforcement professional by background. Spent 36 years in the forces of law and order in this country. My expertise is organised crime, and I'm an intelligence collector by trade. I understand the world of human and organised crime very well, and yet 10 years ago, or just over, when I met Stop the Traffic, I really didn't recognise this problem of human trafficking that they were describing in great detail. And forged a partnership between them and our National Crime Agency, which I worked for at that stage. And the journey since then has been an interesting one. Law enforcement, of course, is still coming to terms with the scale and nature of this problem. And I suspect, looking around this room, for many of you, this may be a bit of a learning journey. So I'll try to be, bear in mind the time, I'll try to be interesting yet quick. Scale of the issue. Around the globe, the best academic estimates are that there are just over 40 million people in circumstances of modern slavery, exploitation, trafficking, however you wish to describe it, not free to make their own choices. That's a lot of people. The thing that interests me particularly is just under 90 million people have had one of those experiences in the last 5 years. For those of you with a business eye, that will give you a clue as to how this business operates. Annual revenues, $150 billion was the 2016 estimate. I reckon it's 5 times that globally. UK Home Office still sticks with the figure that somewhere between 10 and 13,000 people in our country, in the UK, are in circumstances of modern slavery. I think if you could gather everybody in those circumstances up and take them to Manchester, you could fill Old Trafford twice to the brim with the people in circumstances of slavery, at a minimum, in our country. Not, of course, that any of you would ever want to go to Old Trafford. I understand that completely. And of course, last year, the national referral mechanism, of which there is a thing, these are people who are referred to government services or outsourced government services. Of course, they would be outsourced. That's a joke. Just under 7,000 people. Now, I don't know how you feel about things, but I can't see any way on earth that half the people in exploitation in this country got referred to the national referral mechanism last year. It doesn't add up. So I began my journey with Stop the Traffic as a cop, thinking like a cop. I am not an IT professional in any way, shape or form. I'm not even sure I'm a professional. And I began thinking, we just need to find out who the bad actors are, line up the intelligence, investigate, prosecute. Justice process wins. That is because my background is as a narco warrior, and I didn't exactly solve that problem for you either, did I? And I'm afraid the analysis is different. It's an errant economy, and it's intertwined in the one that we all exist in very comfortably. So I'm afraid to tell you that you've all eaten something today that was picked or packed by someone in exploitation. You will all be wearing something this evening that was in some way created by someone in exploitation, and I could go on. It's a business, and it works from 4 fundamental aspects. Needs to have new recruits every year. So there are perennial recruiting zones around the UK, but around the globe, where the traffickers are well connected, and they constantly dip in for the next person that's been groomed, and in they go into the supply chain. Those 39 Vietnamese people that died in the back of the truck, they were part of a pipeline of groups of people moving across via China. They virtually all come via China. They pick up false documents from China, make their way into Eastern Russia, and then across via Siberia to Moscow, and so on and so on. And there are little groups of them in various staging posts along the way, waiting for the next stage of their journey. It takes up to 6 months. And there'll be more on trucks coming across the channel. The poor people that didn't make it weren't supposed to die, of course, because they're valuable. You can exploit someone every minute of every day and make a great deal of money out of them if you choose to. So, needs recruits. So we have to find a way to undermine the recruiting process. Number one. Traffickers do it for money, therefore they want to make money, access that money, move that money. So financial services organisations are an important factor in this conversation. They need to create and maintain demand for the product and services of the people they exploit. Sounds obvious, but it's true. Estimates are something like 65% of the people in exploitation in the UK are in forced labour, and 35% in some kind of sex work. That's an estimate, but it's a reasonable one in my submission. And last but not least, it has to be risk managed enough for it to be worth doing for the bad guys, for the bad actors. They wouldn't do it if they thought they'd be caught, is the bottom line. So we have created this society that manages all that very comfortably in and amongst us, and my job is to upset that equation as much as I can. So if we continue just to treat this as a rescue or a justice issue, we will fail. Every rescue, sadly, just leads to another recruitment, And many of those who are rescued cannot be reintegrated easily. They go back home, often to far-flung places around the world, and are instantly back in trafficking because their families don't accept them for all kinds of reasons. Will not impede, if we continue to look at it just as justice probably will not impede access to money effectively. We need to. We need to undermine that demand issue, and we need to make risk uncomfortable for the traffickers. So that's the purpose of Traffic Analysis Hub. Literally until the 6th of November, when we opened up this for access to businesses, law enforcement, not-for-profits, financial services organisations, governments. Until we opened that up on the 6th of November, there was no consolidated understanding of the scale and nature of trafficking around the world, other than those academic estimates. You could not ask a business if its supply chain was wandering into a dangerous sector because they just couldn't find that information anywhere. And our job has been to start painting that picture in a much richer way. And I noticed something, and just for the sake of saying, climate risk creates populations that have to move. Populations that have to move become vulnerable. And that, again, is a fact. And they become vulnerable to traffickers. Once traffickers can find vulnerable groups of people, they will begin to do their evil way. So, Traffic Analysis Hub has been created. It has no personal identifier information in it at all because it has to work globally effectively, be accessed in the cloud by any of the member entities that wish to do it. And it needs to be able to do that lawfully and protect privacy. So this is all non-personal information at the moment. It's what happened, where it happened, how it happened, what was the exploitation journey, what was the exploitation type, gender, demographics. They're all important, they're all interesting, but there's no names and addresses and telephone numbers in there. It is the first truly multi-sector platform. It is gathering data from not-for-profits and sharing it with governments. Governments have agreed to begin to share their knowledge with the hub. The National Crime Agency has said it will sign up and share the backstories of investigations. This is a first. Interpol has agreed to sign up and share the backstories of investigations. They're all poring over the contract I've sent them now. Contracts law is not my forte. Fortunately, we have Clifford Chance who have stepped up and pro bono supported this. So they've done the legals. And in the US, we're supported by a company called Jones Day. And as I say, IBM have knitted this together very well for us. Their corporate social responsibility efforts on this front are very much appreciated. Open source AI, we think, is game changing because down the track we're going to need to start predicting how the business will move once we start to disrupt it. And we're using Watson AI technology to help us do that. To do that, we need a lot of records in the system to begin with. We're operating currently on up to 100,000 records, and we're going through a lot of data cleansing and making sure there's no duplication of records in there because sometimes 3 different sources will send you the same record. So it's an important element not to over-egg the pudding, so as to speak. But it comes from a common desire to eradicate the threat of trafficking, and to do that you need to call on the biggest pool of data you can get, and that needs to come from multiple sources. And then you need to be able to present it back to people in a way they can use it. I was quite interested in the former speaker's presentation of climate risk materials to their various customers. We have customers too. You've got to give people intelligence not as a long diatribe, a 6-page narrative about threat and risk. You need to give them something they can use. And that needs to be short and sharp and informative. And because it's an independent not-for-profit, Stop the Traffic do not own it, IBM do not own it. It's owned by its participants, and therefore costs of membership are very low. Quick for instance, if you're a not-for-profit and you provide data into the system, your annual fees are £100. if you're a financial services organisation of the like of HSBC, it's going to cost you £20,000 a year. That's just so that it would survive and thrive. We don't need to make a profit. There are some downsides. Cross-sector working scares people, is the truth. If I ask the National Health Service to share the data they might have from their safeguarding processes around trafficking, they all want to run and hide. And my job is to convince them that this is safe and appropriate as a platform to work with. So different sectors are on a slower or perhaps a different journey time frame. There are early adopters and there'll be those that come more slowly. Everybody's asking what they can share. I would actually say there are bigger risks to stay outside of this. The world now requires businesses to provide modern slavery statements online, signed off by a director, an executive director, not a non-exec, to attest to the work that they've been doing to ameliorate the risk of slavery in their supply chain. And it's becoming gently laughable in some places. In 2015, when the legislation arrived, the first modern slavery statements were out there probably about a year later. Some of them haven't changed. Some of them were written by the most junior person possible in the business. And some of them are just a straight rip-off of somebody else in the sector. It's like stealing your next-door neighbour's homework when you were at school. And that will come back to bite people eventually. Both commercially, for all the same reasons that the previous speaker mentioned. Shareholders are asking more and better questions, and regulators are asking more and better questions. And our hope is that the legislation will change, and the teeth for producing a real modern slavery statement will be in the Companies Act. And if you sign off on something that isn't true, you will be barred from being a director of a business going forward. Now, for me, that wouldn't bother me a whole lot, but for some people, that would be a serious implication, particularly if you have a very large and successful business. Transaction monitoring schemes to spot money laundering. Is anyone from financial services here today? Anyone looking for? How efficient, on a scale of 1 to 10, how efficient are transaction monitoring processes? Yeah, they're not very good, are they? They're very variable, let me just say that. When I first started, I'm not an AML expert, and when I first started this conversation with banks and financial services organisations, I honestly thought that by sort of inducting our data onto some sort of a virtual workbench and running it across their transaction monitoring processes, we get somewhere. I was fooling myself. There is lots more to do. And we actually, at the moment, are providing more fodder for Know Your Customer and due diligence processes than we are for anti-money laundering work based simply out of transaction monitoring. Transaction monitoring is like a snowstorm. It's very hard to see what you want to see. Improve work streams, it does improve the focus for AML because it points you to hotspot areas and hotspot activities. It gives context to criminal investigations. I was talking to a senior investigating officer only yesterday. He was the lead person on the Polish investigation in the West Midlands that was reported in the summer. A Polish group had been trafficking people from Poland to the West Midlands, working on such wonderful places like David Austin Roses. Anyone got any roses in their garden? David Austin Roses had employed dozens of people who were exploited through this group of individuals. The farms that provide salads for Waitrose and Marks and Spencers and like businesses, and construction sites and so on and so forth. 400 people in 5 years was their tally of trafficked persons, and they'd made significant amounts of money. And when the investigators went to the banks and said, when they opened this bank account, what did you think? And the bank teller said, I knew there was something funny about them. But they hadn't escalated it. And that was unfortunate. So, supply chain audits, they're going to be enhanced by the kind of focus we give through Traffic Analysis Hub. And I genuinely hope it will be up to around 300,000 records by the middle of next year. That's a lot in trafficking terms. That's probably the equivalent when you consider some of those investigations have 400 people in them. That takes it to a couple of million exploited persons. It's interesting. We think that legal firms, anyone from legal world here? Anyone from big law firms? There's a new area for you to explore, Dalim. Big legal firms who do a lot of mergers and acquisitions work and the legal work around investments have a lot to gain from this. And last but not least, frontline teams like those bank tellers, when you can take this more granular understanding of how trafficking wanders into a financial services organisation or some other kind of business, it changes the way they operate, and that makes the risk higher. And the key to this is to send not only messages to all those affected areas, but also to use communications cleverly along the way, so that not only are you making various aspects of business world and community world more resilient, you're also sending a message to the traffickers that it's been lucrative so far, it might be time to give up. And that's where we're trying to go. And as Dalim has said, I'm off to Bangladesh at the end of the week, where I'm working with an organisation called BRAC, who are an enormous not-for-profit out there, where they're struggling with one province where each year 50,000 women and girls are trafficked across the border into India, which just struck me as an extraordinary statistic. And social media is going to help me solve that problem to a degree. So, you saw the Sustainable Development Goals that my colleague put up earlier. 8.7 is where trafficking fits in, although it does fit into many of the others in a smaller way. We squarely address the drivers out of that Sustainable Development Goal. And there's a thing called the Liechtenstein Initiative, because Liechtenstein paid all the money for the work to be done, that equally points squarely at initiatives like Traffic Analysis Hub. More data, frankly, will win this war, and it will always win difficult issues like this, providing you can democratise it, give people a safe space to share it, and make it non-competitive, which is what we are seeking to do, which I think what we have achieved. The global approach will help guide systems development. Climate stuff has relevance here. Wildlife trafficking will benefit from this sort of process because there are overlaps. Counterfeit products, counterfeit branded products will also fit into this style of operating. And again, as my previous colleague said, open source is the answer to a lot of the issues and how you manipulate and manage open source material. And that's what we're seeking to do here. If you're a member of this, you simply log into IBM Cloud Space and you can analyze it and work it to your heart's content with the filters that are there to give yourself some kind of simple intelligence output that works for your organization. And there are strong opportunities for PR and marketing.
Thank you very much for attending this event. I know it's very late and I'm between food and yourself. So I will just take a few moments to say how this has been a great year. You know that it's been 50th year of ISACA, and we celebrated this by a day event in May. And I would like to share a good news that we are now one of the largest chapter in Europe. So, and we, as a chapter operations, try to improve our performance continuously. We actually moved our back office operations to Office 365, and I would like to thank and call out Kamal Khan. He's not here today, but he has done a brilliant job. So, yeah. As a part of continuous improvement, we have also introduced a structured ticketing system. What it means is if you drop a mail to admin, it will be logged as a ticket and we will monitor it to be resolved in acceptable time. We know that you all cannot attend the events, so we have actually implemented Workcast. It's a kind of webinar-based system, and you can watch it and also answer the questions to earn the CPE points. We have also launched mentoring system. We have actually had first program with the University of Greenwich, and we will be holding event this month to the students who have graduated. And I must call out Alan Boardman. Please, would you stand up, please? And he has been leading single-handedly that mentoring program. So I would like to, to encourage and have a conversation with him how mentoring can help you and help us develop the skill pipeline. Also, I think it's an opportune moment to mention that Alan won ISACA Eugene M. Frank Award for his meritorious performance for ISACA International and for his contribution to the London chapter and ISACA. I would like to call him out and give him a gift, please. Alan.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Really appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you. I'll treasure that.
And of course, I would like to call out a few other names at the board level. Monica Mead, who was here earlier, was helping you check in. She is our academic relations director, and she's doing a great job. And one of the events where we talked about we will be holding in Greenwich University is organized by her. We also had a first time participated in career fair with the Royal Holloway University. So that's great. I would also like to call out Ken, immediate past president, who has been a great contributor to the chapter. Ken, please.
I'm looking forward to that. Thank you.
And last but not least, I would like to call out Dalim, who is a kind of unsung hero because he organized most of these successful events. So Dalim, please come to the stage. And Dalim is now trying to organize events in other sites as well so that we can provide wider coverage to our members. Last but not least, I think future is bright for ISACA. This year, ISACA appointed David Samuelson as our CEO, and we have Brennan as a chair of ISACA board. I think we are actually in very good hands, and future is very, very bright for ISACA. With that, I would like to thank you and would like to wish you a Merry Christmas and festive season. Thank you very much.